If you're struggling in push-pull roller coaster relationships with partners that you love to hate and hate to love, then it's likely you're struggling with insecure attachment styles. This means that your blueprint for love and relationships was likely disrupted by an attachment trauma in your childhood or even in your adult romantic relationships. Now, whether or not you've ever taken a Psych 101 class, it's likely that you've heard that your childhood experiences can affect you in adulthood. For those that have experienced significant trauma in their childhood and they are aware of it, this usually makes a lot of sense to them. But there are many individuals who don't feel like they had such a terrible childhood. And for them, their struggles in love as adults is baffling. These folks often tell me, "But I had a normal childhood. Why is this happening to me now?" And so today we are going to examine how oftentimes normal childhood experiences can actually be disguised developmental traumas. As a reminder, in this video series, we are exploring how attachment styles can affect you on the physiological level. To get caught up, I recommend watching our previous videos on my playlist for healing attachment wounds, in which we discuss the impact of epigenetics and intergenerational trauma, as well as the effects of trauma on the brain and nervous system. But before we dive into today's topic, if you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist with more than 15 years in the field, helping adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can attract the soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions, which I call the McWilliam Method. The content on my YouTube channel is derived from my online courses, which you can learn more about through the link in the caption of this video. If you would like to learn more about your attachment style, you can take the 4-question quiz. If you like what you see and hear and you want to learn more, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put up videos once a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. So let's begin our discussion today by restating the question. But I had a normal childhood, so why am I struggling in my adult romantic relationships? Now, to this, I would say there are 2 possibilities. Number 1, yes. It's possible you had a normal, secure childhood, but your survival system can be newly activated in adulthood, just as it can in childhood. Although if your safety was frequently threatened in childhood, you are more likely to experience insecurity as an adult. Secondly, it's possible that you only think you had a normal childhood, because when dysfunction is the norm, it's hard to tell what is normal and what isn't. And it's likely if you did experience some dysfunction that it was passing itself off as normal. So you've constructed a lot of unconscious beliefs and defenses against recognizing that dysfunction for what it really is. Now, to dig into this, let's examine 2 types of trauma. In teasing out the effects of trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk suggests there are actually 2 types of trauma, and they can look very different. First, we have big T traumas, which are incidental and typically more obviously understood. Then we have little t traumas, which are harder to identify and typically have a cumulative effect. So the most obvious and frequently discussed big T traumas might include alcoholism, drug addiction, abuse and or neglect, assault, incest or rape, fatal accidents, premature death, chronic illness, disaster, poverty, warfare, and so on. And these traumas are typically associated with post-traumatic stress. Now, little t traumas, however, are usually associated with developmental traumas, sometimes called complex trauma or complex post-traumatic stress. Complex trauma begins in early childhood, and it encompasses chronic forms of emotional abandonment and or dismissal. So examples of little t traumas might include non-life-threatening injuries, the death of a pet, daily bullying or harassment at home or at school, the loss of a significant friend or relationship, and so on. But little t traumas can also include subtler forms of emotional invasion, dismissal, or abandonment that have been normalized in our experience. To explain what I mean, I would like to illustrate 2 possible scenarios. First, let's talk about dismissive emotional communications. If you're struggling with anxiety and attempting to cope with it through over-control, like anxious open hearts tend to do, or compulsive withdrawal and avoidance, like avoidant rolling stones tend to do, or you oscillate back and forth between these 2 coping patterns, like disorganized or fearful avoidant spice of lifers tend to do. Somewhere along the lines, you were taught that the outsides do not match up with the insides. So you stopped trusting yourself and your intuition, relying instead on the outside world for validation in its various forms. For example, perhaps your mom or any caretaker appeared upset. Everything about her voice, her movement, and her energy said mad or upset. But when you asked, "Mom, are you upset?" she replied, "Don't be silly. I'm fine." Now, in this moment, you are taught to distrust yourself, your feelings, your instincts, and everything that your bodily senses have communicated, because in that moment, they are dismissed and invalidated by the external world and by someone you trust, idealize, and who holds authority over you. In this moment, mom, or any caretaker, is splitting herself off from the truth of her experience. She's not okay, and she's not owning it. And so she teaches you to split away from the truth of your experience as well. Everything in your being tells you, Mom is definitely not okay. But then she says to you, you're wrong. This lays the foundation for both emotional dismissal and self-abandonment. And anxiety results because it suggests that there is something inherently wrong with us, with our senses and with our instincts. And either we are compelled by the anxiety in an endless pursuit of partners that we idealize and imbue with the same power our mothers had to somehow make us right or wrong, or we cut ourselves off from a very human and natural need for contact to avoid that anxiety altogether. But this creates another set of problems and another type of anxiety, which also carries with it a sense of wrongness about oneself. And sometimes we may find ourselves swinging back and forth between these two poles. So that is one scenario that we might describe as dismissive. Next, let's take a look at an example of an enmeshed situation. So in this case, let's say mom, or any caretaker, is very doting. In fact, she's almost smothering. Perhaps she's a little too involved with your day-to-day activities and decisions. We might describe her as merged with you or enmeshed in every aspect of your life. And when you ask her why she's upset, instead of denying it, she gives you a laundry list of reasons. She also, however, takes care of your every need. You want for nothing. She's a good mom, right? So just do what she wants in the way that she wants it, and everything will be fine. But this undercuts your ability to do anything for yourself. So you don't trust yourself to do anything right. She has made herself indispensable to you out of a fear of abandonment, because on her own, alone, she doesn't feel like she's enough. There's a sense of wrongness that she carries about herself. And no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to fill that void for her. You will never be able to give, do, or perform well enough to her that she will feel satisfied, even though she may endlessly try to enlist you into that role. And so two conflicting messages are transmitted at the same time, as if by osmosis. You will never be enough, and don't abandon me or I will fall to pieces. And because these messages are delivered simultaneously, they create quite a bit of friction and anxiety, because there is no right or clear pathway through it. Then you grow up witnessing that this is how to be in relationships. So you anxiously replicate this not good enough pattern with your partners. Overall, a child determines that their inherent worthiness is dependent upon their parents' responsiveness to them. A child does not have the mental or emotional capacity to just wake up one morning and say, wow, my parent is generally an emotionally dismissive or invasive person, which is a characteristic that was probably around long before me and has nothing to do with me. Clearly, they don't have the tools to do this whole child rearing thing in the way that I need. But that doesn't mean that no one else in the world is capable of meeting my needs, or that somehow I'm not deserving of having my needs met ever. If I can just wait this out, I know love is out there for me and I am fully deserving of it. Because a child does not have this level of conscious awareness or mature discernment as yet, they assume that if their parent cannot or does not respond to them in the way that they need, then it must mean they are undeserving of having their needs met. And so now their internalized love map or blueprint or attachment style starts turning them in an insecure direction. This is when we start wondering if we even have a right to our thoughts, needs, and our feelings. And I call this falling prey to the validation trap. This means that you are over-reliant on the people, places, and things in your environment to affirm your worthiness and your value. And when we fall prey to the validation trap, it leads to what I call emotional crowding and or emotional isolation. Now, I would like to explain a little bit more about this and offer a case example to illustrate. So let's tackle emotional crowding first. When we don't have a good sense of personal boundaries and or we feel flooded by our emotions, we can sometimes equate vulnerability with a kind of emotional leakage. So it tends to kind of spill out of us uncontrollably and in inappropriate situations. And as that leakage starts to crash up and splash against other people's emotional boundaries, they start to feel pushed around and crowded out by you. And this creates conflict in relationships because it may leave you feeling humiliated and overexposed. It can turn you into a target of criticism and judgment, or even an abusive personality. It can alienate people because they feel uncomfortable being around you and because you don't appear to be emotionally in charge of yourself. You can also come across as a bit of a drama addict who tries to emotionally manipulate the people around you. Now, to avoid this, we may then swing too far in the opposite direction, and that is when we arrive at emotional isolation. If you decide that you're going to opt for emotional isolation over emotional crowding because you're afraid of being vulnerable or weak, you tend to clam up too tightly, hide too much of yourself, and refuse to let anyone or anything in. And this creates a conflict because you come across as cold, crass, aloof, rude, or insensitive, and that makes you appear too intimidating and unapproachable. It's also hard for people to trust you, so you have to work twice as hard to gain anybody's respect and regard. You may also come across like you've got it all figured out, so no one thinks to offer you help or support you when you need it. People approach you in an overly aggressive way, even when unprovoked, because they think they have to hit harder to get a rise out of you, not realizing how sensitive you actually are. This can leave you feeling isolated and lonely for connection, with few people willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Both circumstances can ruin a relationship, and especially in combination with each other. For example, Katerina is a 28-year-old cisgender heterosexual woman, and she suspected for a long time that she might be avoidant or fearful avoidant spice of lifer because she'd read a list of characteristics that hit home. But she still struggled with attributing some of her behavioral patterns to her upbringing because she felt like she'd been very fortunate in life. Her parents provided for her financially, and there were no big T traumas such as abuse or neglect. Overall, Katerina experienced her parents as loving and well-meaning. If things were going wrong in her life, it was her fault and nobody else's. But with a little more probing, Katerina did admit that when faced with emotionally difficult decisions or situations, neither of her parents offered very much support. Her father could become controlling, condescending, and reactive. Her mother's immediate response was to get upset, claiming she didn't know what to do, and would repeat over and over again, "Oh, I'm such a failure as a mother." Then Katerina would feel guilty for burdening them and be left wondering, am I ungrateful? So let's dig into this a little bit. When Katerina needed emotional support and was met with a self-flagellating mother, this forces Katerina to abandon her own uncomfortable feelings, to assuage and validate her mother's capabilities. Basically, it's like Katerina's mother is expressing, I experience your bad feelings as a criticism of me, and I find that intolerable. So I'm going to make myself feel twice as bad as you so that you have to take care of me instead, and I don't have to feel like I'm a failure of a mother anymore. This is emotional crowding, when someone effectively dismisses your feelings by crowding them out through a form of over-emoting. And from the perspective of the emoter, they will probably experience this as a form of emotional leakage. It is often unintentional and uncontrollable, at least initially. Katerina also described her father as being controlling, condescending, and reactive, which we might equate with a more obvious dismissive tendency. This usually results in emotional isolation, which is when someone throws up thick and impenetrable walls against warmth and connection so as to avoid revealing feelings of weakness, inadequacy, or vulnerability. Now, in her adult relationships, Katerina opted more often than not to deal with things in the way that her father did, because her mother's emotional fragility caused more stress to her nervous system. But in Katerina's avoidance of being over-emotional, she unconsciously and energetically pushes really hard against passionate feelings. And that creates a lot of resistance and force. And so the harder she pushes, the more it becomes a powerful point of attraction in her energetic body or in her vibe, let's say. So Kim tends to attract and be attracted to situations and relationships that wind up with emotional crowding. For example, a previous partner, whom I will call Tim, did something thoughtless and disrespectful, which involved large amounts of alcohol, a flirtation with a high school girlfriend, and a suggestive picture posted online. When Katerina confronted Tim with the issue, he appeared dramatically apologetic. I know, it was awful," he said. "I feel so bad about it. It was so terrible of me. How can I make it up to you? Whatever it is, I'll do it. You have every right to hate me forever. I'll understand if you never want to speak to me again." Basically, Tim punished himself enough so that Katerina wouldn't have to. But it also meant that she had no space to express her feelings. He was already doing all the work for her. And so she's kind of left holding this bag of unexpressed anger and resentment, feeling like, what do I do with this now? He'll probably shatter if I express how I really feel. And he's already beating himself up so much. I just don't want to add to the pile. And so Katerina stuffed it down and felt increasingly anxious, depressed, and distrustful, worried about tucking in all the corners of her upset, lest Tim bump himself on a corner and feel upset and go find solace in another woman's arms. So in effect, Tim's emotional crowding caused Katerina to emotionally isolate even more. Now, Katerina's childhood experience may not have been one of extreme emotional abuse or neglect, but she still experienced a slow and confusing chipping away at her sense of self, as well as her right to have and express her needs and feelings. And these little t traumas, or developmental traumas, often fly below the radar of what we are socialized to believe is normal. Additionally, Katerina's fear of appearing ungrateful was generating an energetic momentum that attracted partners into her life who would perpetuate this unhealthy emotional dynamic until she was able to allow herself to feel whatever she needed to feel. Feeling her feelings without judgment or dismissal would make it a lot safer for her to be vulnerable, because she would be able to identify, establish, and respect her own boundaries and name and claim her emotions well enough that she could begin to experience a full range of them. This would require not allowing her pain to be crowded out and acknowledging that if Tim felt upset or criticized by her pain, then it was his responsibility to process those feelings for himself. Though it might be difficult at first, if Katerina could allow Tim to do that, he might actually gain a better sense of himself and his own personal boundaries too, which would also let him know how much control he actually has over himself and allow him to be a lot more accountable to his behaviors. The point of this story is to illustrate how unconscious and automatic patterns of relating to our lovers can be passed down through the generations, not only through epigenetics, but also through chronic and repeated instances of normalized developmental trauma. Now, if you like this video and you want to learn more, make sure you give me a like or a comment below and we can make more content like this. I would love to know if you resonate with either of these two stories and or if you have an example of a developmental trauma in your own experience. Additionally, stay tuned for next week. We will be discussing the impact of certain neurochemicals on the body and the attachment system, which can keep you addicted and running back to inconsistent partners that treat you poorly. Also, remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week and I wouldn't want you to miss out. Thank you for watching.